Welcome back to this lecture series titled Our Living National Constitution, Its History and Evolving Interpretation. My name is Edward J. Dodson. This is lecture 10 titled Laissez-Faire Lite and the Pull to the Right. The 27th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1992, states that any law passed by Congress that changes the salary of its members cannot take effect until after the next election of representatives. This means a pay raise for Congress cannot be implemented immediately after it's approved. It has to wait until the next election cycle. In 1992, the presidential campaign was once again strongly influenced by the presence of an independent candidate. This time it was Texas businessman Ross Perot. The Democrats rallied around William Jefferson Clinton, who won with 43% of the popular vote. The fact that Ross Perot won almost 20 million votes was a clear indication that many Americans were dissatisfied with either of the two main parties. Before his first month in office ended, Clinton reversed Reagan directives on abortion and family planning. He signed the Family Medical Leave Act, requiring employers to give employees paid leave for medical reasons. A few months later, he directed the armed forces not to inquire about the sexuality of a recruit. And he also signed the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, increasing the top tax rate on individual incomes from 35% to 39%, while reducing the tax burden on those with lower incomes. The bill is passed without any Republicans voting in favor. In December, Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico. In July of 2020, analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations examined the impact of the agreement on the U.S. economy, concluding, "Economists largely agree that NAFTA benefited North America's economies. Regional trade increased sharply over the treaty's first 2 decades. Cross-border investment also surged, with U.S. foreign direct investment stock in Mexico increased in that period from $15 billion to more than $100 billion. Meanwhile, debate persists regarding NAFTA's effect on employment and wages. Some workers and industries face painful disruptions as they lost market share due to increased competition, while others gained from the new market opportunities that were created. The framers had absorbed at least part of the message provided by the great Scot political economist Adam Smith in his 1776 treatise, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. There would be freedom of movement of goods and people across the states. Restraints on trade with foreign nations was another matter. Smith wrote, "Were all nations to follow the liberal system of free exportation and free importation, the different states into which a great continent was divided would so far resemble the different provinces of a great empire. As among the different provinces of a great empire, the freedom of the inland trade appears, both from reason and experience, not only the best palliative of a dearth, but the most effective preventative of a famine. So would the freedom of the exportation and importation trade be among the different states into which a great continent was divided." The ideological tide was clearly turning by 1994. The result of the November midterm elections was that the Republicans regained control of the House and the Senate for the first time in 40 years. It is today interesting to recall that on the 1st of December of that year, the Senate passed the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, reducing trade barriers between multiple countries. Clinton's next big political fight was over the forecasted budget deficit for fiscal year 1996, which called for raising the debt limit to $5.5 trillion. In his veto message to the Congress, he argued the case that budget issues are distinct from the debt. As I have said clearly and repeatedly, the Congress should keep the debt limit separate from the debate over how to balance the budget. The debt limit has nothing to do with reducing the deficit. it has to do with meeting the obligations that the government has already incurred. What President Clinton said that day ignored the fact that under conventional monetary policy, the revenue needed to pay for bondholders the interest earned had to be raised by taxes, whatever fees government collected, or even greater money creation by the Federal Reserve. Conventional wisdom argued that at some point the interest charges would begin crowding out other government programs. Economist L. Randall Wray was in the vanguard of those challenging conventional wisdom. In the summer 1997 Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics, he called for 3 specific policy changes. The policy implications are clear. 1. Return central banks to a less active role that abandons attempts to fine-tune the economy. 2. Monetize a greater proportion of government debt through central bank purchases. And 3. Restrict central bank functions to those traditionally associated with central banking, namely determination of the government borrowing rate and lender of last resort activity. A commentary by Stephen Moore of the Cato Institute in October 1998 pointed out that revenue increases had already started under George H.W. Bush. Additionally, Newt Gingrich worked to get Republicans committed to a balanced budget, forcing the Clinton team to match their balanced budget plan. Moore actually expressed concern over the possibility of a revenue surplus. The budget surpluses over the next 5 years could easily exceed $500 billion. Leaving all of that extra money lying around within the grasp of vote-buying politicians is an invitation to financial mischief. If Congress and the President use the surpluses to fund a new spending spree, we may find that surpluses are more of a curse than a blessing. It must be stated that on an ongoing basis, government securities are maturing, requiring the principal to be paid to whoever holds the security. So, a decision could have been made to use any surplus to permanently lower the debt. Historians give Clinton mixed reviews on what was accomplished and not accomplished during his 2 terms as president. One major failure was on comprehensive health care reform. Additionally, necessary restructuring of Social Security and Medicare did not happen. The ideological divide over the constitutional mandate to government was an important factor, but there were and are other cracks in the Constitution. Ganesh Sitaraman refers to a study on congressional hearings by Harvard Law School professor Lawrence Lessig that says a good deal about the priorities of those sent to Washington. Lessig looks at the decline of non-appropriations committee meetings from 1983 to 1997. During that period, the House of Representatives committee meetings dropped from 782 in 1983 to 287 in 1997. In the Senate, the number of committee meetings dropped from 429 to only 175 by 1997. Congress people now routinely spend only a few days each week working in Washington and more time campaigning and raising money back home. The 2000 presidential election was the first in 112 years in which a president lost the popular vote but captured enough states to win the Electoral College. George W. Bush was declared the winner over Al Gore after winning the popular vote in Florida by just 537 votes. Early in his first term, Bush rejected the Kyoto Protocol, the international treaty to mandate limits on industrial emissions in an effort to reduce the rising risk of global warming. Bush signed 2 tax reduction bills in 2001 and 2003, and of course high-income taxpayers benefited most. The top 1% of households received an average tax cut of over $570,000 between 2004 and 2012. The bills also phased out the estate tax, repealing it entirely in 2010. The American public was shaken when on the 11th of September, Islamic terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airplanes and crashed them into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and in rural Pennsylvania. In March of 2003, U.S. and Allied forces began an invasion of Iraq, and on the 1st of May, the war is declared to be won. On the 17th of May 2004, President Bush issued a statement calling for a constitutional amendment defining and protecting marriage as a union of a man and a woman as husband and wife. 11 states passed amendments to their own constitutions limiting official recognition of marriage to one man and one woman unions. In 2022, President Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act, which guaranteed the rights of all couples without regard to their race or gender. In the midterm elections of November 2006, the Democrats regained control of both the House and the Senate. Nancy Pelosi became the first woman Speaker of the House. Before George Bush could pass the torch to a Republican successor, U.S. financial markets and many of the nation's largest financial institutions failed or nearly failed. In October, Bush signed the Emergency Stabilization Act of 2008, the largest bailout of the private sector in U.S. history. In 2008, the Republicans chose the senior senator from Arizona, John McCain, as their presidential candidate. Sarah Palin, the governor of Alaska, was his running mate. The Democrats ran the junior senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, and the senior senator from Delaware, Joe Biden. The Iraq War and the financial crisis were the major issues. Barack Obama's victory over John McCain seemed to signal a decline in the importance of a candidate's racial or ethnic background, or perhaps at the time of this election, how the candidate stood on several important issues made the difference. Obama's popular vote exceeded that for McCain by 9.5 million. The states in blue went for Obama, those in red for McCain. 2 days following his inauguration, President Obama issued an executive order directing that detainees in armed conflict shall be treated humanely. Obama pledged to close the Guantanamo Bay detention facilities, and although the prison's population was reduced, the president and his successors found there were insurmountable legal challenges. As of January 2025, the facility still had 15 men. Next, President Obama signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, approving $787 billion in stimulus funds. Then in July, he signed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. In a campaign speech Obama made in Manchester, New Hampshire on the 18th of October 2012, the president told his audience, "We got back every dime used to rescue the banks." Research that year by the Poynter Institute indicated the truth was rather more complicated. Not all of the banks who received TARP money have repaid the loans. In fact, 400 plus banks are still on the government's red list. More than have completed the payments. And according to the GAO, some may never pay the money back. But the fact remains, due to interest, dividends, and other revenue streams, the government has received more money back, $266.7 billion according to the Treasury, than it handed out to banks under the bailout law, $245.2 billion. We rate this claim mostly true. In October, Barack Obama received the 2009 Nobel Peace Prize. His remarks accepting the prize revealed how little peace there was in the world. Still, we are at war, and I'm responsible for the deployment of thousands of young Americans to battle in a distant land. Some will kill, and some will be killed. And so I come here with an acute sense of the costs of armed conflict, filled with difficult questions about the relationship between war and peace, and our efforts to replace one with the other. Now, these questions are not new. War in one form or another appeared with the first man. At the dawn of history, its morality was not questioned. It was simply a fact, like drought or disease, the manner in which tribes and then civilizations sought power and settled their differences. I do not bring with me today a definitive solution to the problems of war. What I do know is that meeting these challenges will require the same vision, hard work, and persistence of those men and women who acted so boldly decades ago. And it will require us to think in new ways about the notions of just war and the imperatives of a just peace. There remained a long list of domestic issues to work on. On the 23rd of March 2010, he signed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which significantly expanded Medicaid and Medicare. Voters were not impressed with what had thus far been accomplished. The Republican Party gained the majority in the House of Representatives and gained 6 seats in the Senate as a result of November 2010 midterm elections. On the 22nd of December 2010, Obama signed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal Act, removing restrictions on the rights of LGBTQ individuals to openly serve in the military. Then, in July of 2014, he signed an executive order prohibiting workplace discrimination against federal employees based on sexual orientation or gender identity. On the 2nd of August 2011 came the Budget Control Act, which resolved the debt ceiling crisis. Americans decided in 2012 to continue on the journey with Barack Obama, who defeated Mitt Romney in the presidential election. The Democrats retained control in the Senate, but failed to regain control of the House. Jane Mayer, investigative journalist and staff writer for The New Yorker, quoted Obama on just how much money was now needed to campaign for high elected office. Obama won, but he had few illusions that he had vanquished big money. I'm an incumbent president who already had this huge network of support all across the country and millions of donors, he told a few supporters. It enabled him to match whatever check the Koch brothers wanted to write. But he warned, I'm not sure that the next candidate after me is going to be able to compete in that same way. A continuing challenge for the Obama administration was the public outcry over the bailout of the nation's largest financial institutions after they engaged in such high-risk financial investments such as derivatives and collateralized mortgage obligations. Remarks by Attorney General Eric Holder while testifying on Capitol Hill on the 15th of May 2013 only intensified the public debate. I am concerned that the size of some of these institutions becomes so large that it does become difficult to prosecute them. When we are hit with indications that if you do prosecute, if you do bring a criminal charge, it will have a negative impact on the national economy, perhaps world economy. That is a function of the fact that some of these institutions have become too large. It has an inhibiting impact on our ability to bring resolutions that I think would be more appropriate. Ganesh Sitaraman comments further on just how bad the situation has become. At a Senate hearing in 2013, then Attorney General Eric Holder admitted that the banks were so huge that they were above the law. Holder later backtracked on his comments, but his point speaks directly to how economic power becomes politically, or in this case, legal privilege. Equal justice under law simply doesn't apply to the biggest banks. The wealthiest among Americans had little to complain about. Not only were the tax rates on high individual incomes back down to under 40%, gains on the sale of financial assets and land, inappropriately described as capital gains, given that actual capital goods depreciate over time, losing exchange value, were even more generously treated, taxed at only 15%, down from a high of 39.9% in 1977. And then there was the generous treatment of the huge estates about which the framers worried, again from Professor Sitaraman. The ability to pass on wealth to the next generation was one of the founders' great fears. They were concerned about hereditary wealth, which at the time manifested itself through land inheritance policies. According to data from the Tax Policy Center, only about 3,800 estates in the entire country pay any estate tax at all, and because of special exemptions, the average estate pays only a 17% rate in taxes. Republicans gained 13 more seats in the House and 9 in the Senate during the 2014 midterm elections. Obama could not help but recognize that the chaotic state of affairs in many of the world's less developed countries was drawing a never-ending migration of people desperately trying to gain entrance to the United States. On the 20th of November 2014, he addressed the nation on immigration reform. For more than 200 years, our tradition of welcoming immigrants from around the world has given us a tremendous advantage over other nations. It's kept us youthful, dynamic, and entrepreneurial. It has shaped our character as a people with limitless possibilities, people not trapped by our past, but able to remake ourselves as we choose. But today, our immigration system is broken, and everybody knows it. My fellow Americans, we are and always will be a nation of immigrants. We were strangers once too. And whether our forebears were strangers who crossed the Atlantic or the Pacific or the Rio Grande, we are here only because this country welcomed them in and taught them that to be an American is about something more than what we look like or what our last names are or how we worship. What makes us Americans is our shared commitment to an ideal, that all of us are created equal and all of us have the chance to make of our lives what we will. As a person of color and of mixed race heritage, Barack Obama was more than likely very sincere in his belief that a high degree of equality of opportunity exists in this country. This is certainly true for political appointees and the revolving door employment with corporations, as commented on by Professor Satterman. They go back and forth from regulatory agencies to the very industries that they were supposed to regulate. In December 2014, Senator Elizabeth Warren observed that 3 of the last 4 Treasury secretaries under Democratic presidents have had Citigroup affiliations before or after their Treasury service. The 4th was offered but declined, Citigroup's CEO position. The vice chairman of the Federal Reserve worked at Citigroup as an executive, and directors of the National Economic Council and Office of Management and Budget, our current U.S. Trade Representative, and senior officials at the Treasury Department also have had Citigroup ties. And this was just for a single Wall Street firm. With the Republicans gaining control of both the presidency and the Congress in 2017, what he considered as his most important achievements, the Affordable Care Act and the Paris Climate Change Agreement, came under attack. And with that, we end Lecture 10.